Hello, everyone. Welcome to your affirming interfaith community, Swedenborgian community online. We are so happy to be connected to you this evening. Know that we strive to uplift your heart, your living through these discussions, through our guests, and through our connections. So tonight we are greatly blessed and honored by the presence of Reverend David Brown. Hello, Reverend.
Hello there.
How's it going? It's been a few months since I've seen you. I used to see you more regularly.
That's right. Yeah. Well, glad to be here. I'm able to contribute tonight. So, yeah, glad to reconnect a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is it quite? So I'm stuck in like surrounded by snow in Canada, Kitchener, Ontario. Is it the usual warm and sunny there in Rancho Palos Verdes? I don't know if that's actually where you live, but that's where your church is, right?
That is correct. Right. So the South Los Angeles, and the Wayfarers Chapel is located in Rancho Palos Verdes. We did have rain and thunder and lightning today, but then I was able to capture a nice sunset over the beach taking place, but nowhere near the weather that is currently being experienced by all of those that are there in the Midwest. If you're there, I hope you're staying warm. But yeah, that whole polar vortex is that's for real.
Yeah, it's quite insane, and prayers and our hearts go out to those out there in the cold. Yes, please stay safe and warm, and stay nourished as well. But it's nice you're able to catch the sunset there. I used to live in LA, as you know, and wow, that Wayfarers Chapel is quite the sight, quite the beautiful space.
It is.
And it's known for that, right? It's quite famous for that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's maybe a good place to start on some fun topics and themes. And I'm actually, even though this is my 13th season there, I'm actually starting to deepen my appreciation for not only the architecture, but how the blend of nature with architecture and the blurring of the lines of interior and exterior space is not only, aesthetically pleasing. I mean, it's a mid-century masterpiece by Lloyd Wright. But the fact that it's organic architecture and it builds off of the 30 and 60 degree angles found in nature, and a lot of the angles, if you observe a tree, they all use that same, that's how nature grows, and you can find that it shows up in the golden ratio and Fibonacci and all those things. But it turns out that I'm reading a book now. It's called The Nature Fix, and it's a fun book because it's also blending into what I'm researching for my doctoral ministry about neuroscience and all of that. So The Nature Fix, it's by Florence Williams, and what she's kind of makes the case for in her book is how modern humans are basically suffering from not enough time spent in nature, and that there's actually something neurologic within our brains that really responds well to being outdoors, but also simply observing what we find in nature is beneficial for us. And she goes on to kind of the research that's being done in Korea, which is and Japan, which is kind of the epicenter for the nature bathing movement, where they actually, the government's supporting all of these national parks being set up as a place for stressed out people that just simply walk through nature in the woods, and they're observing and recording all these things. Like they take your blood pressure and they'll test it before you do a walk. They'll see what your heart rate is, and even do a saliva test to see what your cortisol rates are. And so they do this, and then, all the evidence is pretty substantial. Just simply walking in nature for 20 minutes lowers your blood pressure, lowers your cortisol, does all these things. So getting back to the architecture, it's just like, wow, this is another kind of transcendent aspect to the architecture itself, which I think speaks to, why it is such a powerful architectural piece, and why I think we claim somewhere between like 300,000 and 500,000 visitors a year. So and that was a surprise to everyone when they opened the doors that there was going to be this huge response to the chapel.
Yeah, it's incredible, and if our viewers don't know, I invite you all to Google Wayfarers Chapel, because it is amazing, and kind of to what Reverend Brown is alluding to, the inside of the chapel is almost like being outside, because not only is the architecture so beautifully made as he described, but it's full of windows, and the trees around it feel just out of arm's reach, and it's like worshiping outside in a beatific chapel space.
Yeah, and that's a whole other piece. I was digging in a little bit on the what Swedenborg writes about the most ancient church, and just gathering around in groves of trees. And I think another really genius piece of the architecture was the vision that was, many decades down the road. It transcended the lifetime of Lloyd Wright himself, and has to do with really the entire intention of why this was created in the first place, which goes back to the story of Lloyd visiting Northern California, and they stop and have lunch at a place in the Redwoods, and according to legend, there was a skylight in this lunch spot, and they were having lunch inside and looked up and gazed through a skylight window and was observing the trees surrounding it. And according to that story, he said to the company at hand at that moment, if I ever do anything religious, this is the inspiration for it. And so it was really a tree chapel, and with that feeling when you look up that you'll be able to see the redwood trees, which is quite fascinating, because it, when it was first built, it was kind of a stark avant-garde piece there, sitting in not much around it, surrounding it, overlooking the ocean, overlooking Catalina Island with those views. But the trees that were planted there when they opened the doors in 1951, in those first few years, the trees were very much, kind of in the background, not really a big presence. So it's only now, when we're approaching 70 years after that you can now go inside the same structure and look up and see pretty much what Lloyd Wright was intending back probably sometime in the 40s, that moment when he looked up and saw the redwood trees surrounding that skylight. So that's another kind of deeper time perspective for the structure itself. And I like to also look at it from a spiritual perspective of correspondence, where you walk into it and something in real time co-responds within us that says, "Wow, this speaks to me in some fashion." So there's a lot to just the space itself there.
Yeah, and what has it been like being the lead minister there with so much traffic and such a beautiful community for 13 years, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, I'm in my 13th season there.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It is busy. It's lively. I think the main piece for me is just surrendering to the day, whatever moment arises. Just that's meant to happen there, and you kind of go with the flow, because it is an active, busy ministry on its own, and life happens. I mean, you do have a really you get to meet with people from all over the world. You have travelers coming into LA, and it's kind of a destination spot. So it's also really a place to evangelize a bit about Swedenborg, because we do have a visitor center. It is the National Memorial dedicated to Emanuel Swedenborg. So there's a lot of kind of unique intersections with kind of who we are as this small tradition with the larger world, and what message do we have, and all of that. So it's it's never the same day, and it's there's always something happening.
I like that message to stay present with the day, with the moment, and because I can only imagine how overwhelming a space with that much traffic, so many weddings. I mean, it's incredible. How much how busy you could be, and I'm curious, being in that type of ministry, what would you say are some of the greatest lessons beyond staying in the moment? Like how do you manage a space where often everyone you meet or not everyone you meet, but a portion of the people who come in are visiting, right? And you said it's kind of an evangelical space. How do you evangelize, whatever the word is, Swedenborgian ideas?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I kind of frame it as chaplaincy, and it is kind of like you can be also meeting with people in these really intense moments of their life. They're in a crisis, and we're the spot that they could find pretty easily. And so whether it's talking with someone on the phone or someone coming there, just again, it's kind of like meeting them where they're at. We do memorials, and sorry about that.
My dog likes to interrupt too.
Along with weddings and just people coming through. So it's again, it kind of comes back to the same theme of staying present as a spiritual practice, because I think that can also be the case if you do a lot of weddings. It's unique for every couple. Hopefully, it's one of those major life moments that they're going to remember forever, and so it really becomes a bit of a kind of a spiritual discipline, just to kind of respond person to where they're at, especially when you are pretty visible to the general public. And I think over the years I've learned the difference between going on and celebrating all the great ways that I'm a Swedenborgian, and why Swedenborg is great, to simply first starting off by asking and inquiring and asking the person who's asking questions more about their religious background, what context are they coming from, and then after I hear a bit more about their own background, then I can start to interjects a little bit more about who we are and our our beliefs are a little bit more. So I think the one thing I've learned about that is simply stepping back a bit into finding out who I'm talking with before kind of launching into that. That's helpful.
No, I love I love how you put that. You want to meet people where they're at, and in a sense, I agree that's actually evangelizing Swedenborgianism, because Swedenborgianism, although not a word that the theologian Swedenborg liked, tends to have at its core kind of an interfaith approach to things, where you don't feel like you need to convert anyone to save their soul necessarily. So and I think it's just more helpful to connect with people where they are in their walks, and uplift them, get to know them, and then you can go from there, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it saves constantly being trying to be on the defense as well, because that can also be the case where, you say something that makes sense to us, like, whoa, yeah, well, the second coming's already happened, and people are like, whoa, hey now, wait a second here, we're still waiting for the first one, or we're waiting for the second coming, but it can be a kind of a
the second coming's unfolding.
The conversation.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to start with, right? Well, it's interesting that I've met a lot of different Christians over time, and people from all faiths, of course, but a lot of them can get on board with the idea that the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of Divinity, of Sophia, Goddess, is unfolding in people's lives. To the extent that we're willing to live into heaven, live into goodness, and support of each other. And but yeah, that phrase, like the second coming's already happened or is happening, is a tough one. It sounds like you have a kind of busy home there. I know you have quite the crew there in wherever you're living. I don't know the town that you're living in. How's your family doing? How's everyone, the three kids and your wife and on?
Yeah, doing well. Everyone's just coming home from a busy day right now. Everyone's doing well this week. Last week was a bit of the stomach flu that went through the household, but this week everyone's healthy. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Did you get sick?
I did not. I was almost there, and I was able to escape it. So I feel pretty good about that, because the rest of the family went through it. I guess I vicariously had it, so I through all of that. But
well, I guess vicariously we all have a lot of things on our plate that we maybe not as quite as close to home, but let's have some gratitude for what we don't have to overcome in ourselves and can support other people with, I guess. And also we have a busy household, you could say, in the Chatsey, so I would be amiss to not connect with the folks there. And if you don't know Reverend Brown, you probably do, but the Chatsey is where people can comment, ask questions, connect, and there's a few comments here. Albert shares that the polar vortex there in Nebraska was quite brutal. I hope you stayed safe, Albert, and yeah, it sounds tough. Similar here, as Alyssa mentioned, and also Albert says, I've been to Wayfarers Chapel, but it sounds like it's changed a lot since the 1980s. Didn't know it was a Swedenborgian church at the time. Has it changed quite a bit since the 80s, Reverend? What would you say are the key differences in chapel experience, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I mean, I wasn't there in the 80s, so I'm going to have to speculate a little bit. Yeah. But, I have met with plenty of couples that say were married there in whether it's the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the main thing that they are most surprised by in terms of the grounds, the life of the ministry, it does relate back to the trees, because they keep on growing and those it does continue to change the look and feel of the place. Some people have been living in the area for years, decades, or maybe their entire life, and they've never stopped in, because it is surrounded by so many trees that some people will even go to the visitor center and wonder if this is the chapel.
Oh, really?
And then we have to point over towards the trees, because it's not just the redwoods, but there are, I believe it's 27 Italian stone pine trees, which are majestic looking, and they really do a good job of really kind of shaping the landscape. But it's not out there in this very neon blinking sign that says come visit me. It's very subtle, and so some people actually, they're thinking of one story, they were quite disappointed when they came there. They're like, this is so small. And it turns out they were looking for the Crystal Cathedral, which is down in Orange County, which is that space. You're probably familiar with Don Schuler and the Hour of Power. And that was, his vision and his ministry back then was, I think that used to be a movie theater, outdoor movie theater, where you just go and park your car and watch a movie. And he kind of turned it into this huge cathedral with lots of glass, and so anyhow, we have at least once, more than once, because I've heard other conversations, been mistaken for instead of the glass church, they were looking for the Crystal Cathedral. So, but back to the question about the 80s, it's I think it has gotten more popular. In the, I think
well,
the
it's been
90s
in TV, right? Like the show Lucifer and even Mad Men, right? You've had recordings there.
Let's see, True Detective, wow. Second season. We're on the first episode of True Detective there. 3 times in The OC, if you remember that show, and then Lucifer, and then
episode 1 too.
There was a music video by Plain Bandit, which got over 1 million views recently. That they just filmed a music video for that.
Wow. Just
recently. So yeah, I mean, we are within Hollywood range, and there's kind of like a 30-mile radius from the studio as to, if you're going to pay, more than the average union fees, you're supposed to be within that radius. So that helps us out. We do get a pretty good exposure with film and television and music videos there on occasion, and at least get a glimpse of Hollywood a bit.
Well, besides the natural ministry of the Frank Lloyd Wright architecture and the beauty of the nature there, what are the other ministries there? You preach and you teach and all that jazz?
All that jazz, yes. It is active, and I'm just starting up a series of courses. February 17th is when I teach two classes back to back. First is Swedenborg 101, so it's a 6-week course where you get to, lead people through the basic theology and tenets of what Swedenborg wrote about, and kind of get to journey with people through that, and that's really fun, because you really get people gathered around and just talking about their beliefs, and they're like, wow, this makes so much sense. And there was even one guy that, this is going back a few years at this point, but this guy who from about the age of 8 onward, and this guy was when he was joining the group, he was probably around 50. So he was an altar boy at the age of 8, and then I forget exactly what the moment was, but he walked away from the church and became not only just an atheist, but an atheist evangelizer. I mean, he was just like active, going around telling people that actively, there is no God, and here's why. So it was like that type of evangelizing, but he came into this course, and it was so profound and yet simple when the explanation of God being love, and it just like he was in tears, weeping, because he had not connected the feeling of love with God, and it was just like in front of this group, he was just like, it's so simple, and you could see him just kind of working through this whole thing of these lost decades where he was, not feeling that, and not, telling others like, there is no such thing. And so to have that breakthrough moment was just, really profound for him, for the group, for me. And it's another reason that inspires me to have these classes in these small groups, because you get those moments to really just kind of break things down in a way that makes sense to people, and can be pretty powerful moments. So that's the first class, and then the next one's going to be dream interpretation and spiritual practice. And so that one's kind of backed by popular demand, because I used to do more dream work courses, and people were like, when are you going to offer that again? Because I've had this dream, I don't know what to do with it, doesn't make sense. And so I've been reading more books about the power of dreams. I mean, obviously it's there throughout the Bible, but the simple act of remembering a dream, and there are other books out there. Robert Moss is really, really good at kind of guided dream work. There's a lot of power in kind of like exploring and also getting answers and messages, and just all kinds of richness that once you start to kind of dig in on the work itself of, what are the symbolism, what's kind of the deeper message coming through. It's also a fun class, because, when you're kind of in the field of, personal growth and kind of trying to integrate and become, more fully human, and, trying to spiritually regenerate yourself. What's fascinating about dreams is that generally we're all uniquely blind to the big messages that are coming through in dreams, and it can take group work to kind of get at those other messages that are trying to come through the dream. So that's another fun class coming up, offering that.
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So that's that coming up. I'm developing more stuff around frequencies, the solfeggios, 528 is a big one. That's the heart chakra, and trying to integrate that into helping people who have a hard time, like whether it's Lectio Divina or just meditation, trying to access the spiritual dimension. I'm trying to develop some of those tools. Also developing more like a 3-day intensive retreat style, incorporating some of that research, and so that's also kind of being developed along with the ministry side of things. And before I forget it, because you were mentioning, goddess and Gaia and kind of divine feminine stuff, it's hard to find in Swedenborg's work, and there's actually different translations, because I believe it's the 1950s translation, and also I think it was in the 80s, there was some work done on Swedenborg's translation of one word, and the word is creatrix. Now, what's interesting about creatrix is in the New Century Edition, that word is retranslated to creatress. And you only find it I think it's maybe once or twice in all of Swedenborg's works where he uses this one word. And I've glommed onto it. I love creatress because it's, it is the feminine version of creator. And so I love that. Who knows exactly how it was intended by Swedenborg, but at least it's out there as creatress now, and I think there's a lot to build on that with what we're seeing with everything happening in the environment, and even President trying to talk about the vortex being not warming, but that's a whole other kind of diatribe about the name for what's happening in ecology and the environment is it's better represented as global climate change, as a placeholder for incorporating all the extremes. So it's, anyhow, that's, I don't know, for moving on to a slightly different topic, or opening up to other things, but I wanted to bring that little piece in as well, because I do think that, we are, moving more towards moving, hopefully collectively, more to a space of being more conscientious about our role with our relation to the environment. So,
yeah, let's hope so. I got dropped for just a few seconds there, so I'm sorry about that. But I think I caught most of what you said, and I think you bring up something really important right now with climate change. I'm sure most of our listeners would agree. And like, what's your response to where we're at and how we move forward and survive the next 100, 200 years on this planet? It's a small question. So.
It's got a solution. Everyone needs to get woke. That's it.
Yeah.
It's really
wake up.
Well, it is a spiritual awakening, and I think the more that happens, individually and collectively, I think ultimately, here's my cosmic perspective, which isn't totally unique to me, but I've glommed onto it, and I like the perspective that what we're witnessing in the outer world is simply a reflection of the inner collectively. So, from that perspective, it's simply an extension of inner psychic pollution that we haven't dealt with and healed, and that gets thrown into the external world as a representation of what's inside us. So I think we're at a moment where, it is fairly critical. It has everything to do with the new heaven, the new earth, and humility and ego and the ability to recognize that the more that we're able to spiritually awaken, the more that we're able to kind of contribute to that connection to divinity, the more that we're actually actively bringing in more heaven here to earth. And, I think what we're witnessing kind of on a larger scale is what happens if you don't go the spiritual route. And I think the two are rising at the same time. More people are waking up spiritually, and what's also happening are those that aren't finding that are just getting more angry and violent and kind of belligerent that the world isn't operating the way that they want it to. So I see both extremes kind of happening in the cross currents of now, with a good possibility to really do something quite extraordinary in the coming decades. That's going to be a really different way of navigating the world. Nope, still there. So I don't know if that was a fairly long-winded answer, but
No, thank you. Yeah.
It's a little bit, it's not whether the earth survives, it's whether humans survive. And so it's a little bit like when, it's co-evolution with us and our relationship to the planet.
Yeah, I like that idea where, we grow with the planet and evolve with the planet, and we're called to some transformation now, right? To survive and reconnect in a lot of ways. And I think what you said about people finding spirituality right now at kind of record pace or record numbers is true. And I think it's interesting that, often we look at today as the end of religion, or we talk about trends in that regard. And of course there's the statistics don't exactly uplift that sentiment entirely, but it does seem to me that, especially in the West, where organized religion is fading in a lot of ways, and the numbers are low, at your average church, right? People are finding kind of a more universal expression of spirituality. And would you say that fits pretty well with your spirituality and that of Swedenborgianism?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing is really a calling out in a bigger way of kind of the blatant hypocrisy of many traditions that did not actually follow in the footsteps of the originator of what they're following, right? So it's in a way it's very unprecedented in that people are seeking their spiritual fulfillment outside of the norms and traditional ways that their families have done it. But it's a breaking apart of the old paradigm and introducing a new one as well. So that also fits in with Swedenborg. You got the vastation happening, right? So the traditional ways that have held up for centuries, millennia, are kind of, they are breaking down. Their structures are breaking down, and it's opening up really this new pocket, which we all, Swedenborg talked about. It is going to be happening in forms and ways that we didn't anticipate, and that seems to be happening quite rapidly and developing and accelerating and gaining all kinds of traction outside of it. So yeah, it does. I think to some degree it still has a challenge. Being a leader in a church, it's like, well, yes, we are. We're not your average church or something. I mean, it is. All these things are happening. They're happening outside of traditional routes, and it's exciting because it is happening, and it will continue. And it's only going to intensify and grow that way. And until it, well, hopefully it doesn't fall into the same trappings of kind of old paradigm, where it becomes about a structure or a building being more important than the way that you are interacting with and connecting with God and your neighbor.
Yeah, well put. I'm curious if I can jump back to a topic you mentioned. You're doing research around dream interpretation, and could you give us a little insight into some of that research, or how you may think it relates to the spirituality that you're talking about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because some of the work that Robert Moss has been doing talks about active dreaming, and he left his body when he was like 5 or 6 and came back, and then he had a second out of body experience. But he talks about these journeys in the realms and coming back. And what's interesting about the way he approaches dream work is, basically it's as important as theology, in that you're developing kind of an existence in the next realm while you're here through active dreaming. So the imagination in the dream realm is vitally important to kind of where we go next, if you will, is part of that. But even more intriguing has to do with kind of ancestral work. And, Swedenborg would call that, what is that? Inherited evils would probably be the phrase or word that encapsulates that. But the way that Robert Moss works with dreams and kind of this whole other works around it, it has to do with, that the ancestors are also with us. And for good and bad. There's ancestral healing that can take place and that our ancestors are actually trying to help and support us through that work. But there's another dimension to it which can be liberating, not only for them but for us. And so he talks about how to access some of these relationships through dream work and find out, what's keeping them from evolving. And so, you get into pretty detailed stuff about how, some people may stay anchored in, places here on Earth or structures that are familiar because they're not wanting to let go and evolve to the next spiritual level. And, I think that's true of our own lives. We can get stuck in places and just kind of do it because it's familiar. And kind of, so some of that work is already kind of at the edge of our, imagination that, if we did spend the time kind of working on, what's happening in our dream self, that we're actually doing some profound healing work, not only for ourselves, but potentially for future generations of ourselves.
Yeah, that's on point, and really a calling for us, I think, each to more and more embody. And I need to turn for a second to our Chatsy, because Albert says that he's met you a few times at some conventions, and he really is you are a really wonderful, genuine person, and he's enjoyed conversing with you informally over time. And he says also, you mentioned connecting with God and your neighbor. He thinks that's a great expression. The Unitarian Universalists he knows use the expression connecting with God. God is in your neighbor. And also I think he resonated with your use of creatress earlier as well. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. There are practices of spiritual practice. One fairly easy one is you don't need to do it out loud, but you simply go about your day and you simply say to yourself, I am that. And so you're connecting yourself to everything that you're witnessing, the good and the bad. And it's kind of a fascinating piece, because that's another part of my work is I call it oneing, where instead of getting to the polarities, it's either this, it's or that, or it's us and it's them. It's trying to see the part of us that's also in them, and so it's there's a term for it, the oneing, where it's all we're all part of the oneness. Even though we do have a distinguishable trait, but there is an access point that each of us can embody, and when we're in that space, then we're able to become a conduit, given our uniqueness and a localized spot for where we physically are, to actually change and shift the environment around us in subtle and more dramatic ways. And I think that is also all tied to the concept of the new earth and how that's going to come about, and the whole message about the meek. It's those that kind of are able to witness their own ego and see that there's a deeper I, a real self beyond that you're only in that space are you able to be and show up for others in a healing capacity. You got to be kind of anchored to the planet, anchored to yourself, anchored to divinity, and it's an interesting concept that when people are able to do that, and especially when they gather together and do that. I mean, that creates an energetic vortex, if you will, that's also quite big and complex and profound and mysterious all at the same time.
I'm reminded of Jesus saying, where two or more are gathered there I am, right? The vortex created between people. I find it also fascinating that in Swedenborgian ideas, or at least in Swedenborg's visions of the spiritual realm, people are always in community, even in this material realm where you may not feel connected to people, or you may be alone on a desert island perhaps, but you're still in deep community with others similar to yourself. So I guess there's always two or more gathered in Christ's name, or hopefully. If you're gathered even alone, you're not alone. I think that's a nice thing to remember as we strive to embody divinity more and more, as you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually something we added to our ministry actually several years back. Is our Wednesday noon prayer service, and what's fascinating is it's not only has it become a tradition to do that, but just how important that has become, not only for the people that are regular to that, but how many prayers have been answered, how many things that, we will ask for collectively, and then it's like, wow, something just shifted, and, this just happened. And so it's, just a reminder that, all of our thoughts are affecting ourselves and others all the time. There is no, direct off button to, while we are incarnated here, we're having effects on ourselves and others, regardless of how aware we are of it. So, having concentrated time and attention to that, it is also a part of, the work that, people are waking up to as well, that in order to heal the planet, we need to kind of heal those wounds within our own self as well. And that, that is I think a big part of the work that it sounds intimidating, like nobody really wants to feel things too deeply. That, we love distraction, we love doing everything that might place attention elsewhere, but really focused attention is not only powerful, but you place. I'm a firm believer that transcendence is actually through the body, not out of it. So placing attention within the body is the way to access transcendent spirituality, and that when you are able to feel that connection, you're feeling. I mean, first of all, the body physically enjoys attention, but beyond that, the connection to the spirit, the soul, that which is the eternity realm, is residing in this physical vessel, in this temporal time, but it's also connecting us when we feel it to the eternal moment, which is also now.
Yeah, it's always now, right? be centered in the moment, and yeah, that's a good reminder. And how do you feel when you mention looking at yourself and saying, okay, this is me, or at least this is what I'm receiving, this is what I've been doing, this is my perspective right now. How do you relate accepting yourself, the good and the bad, to growth from there? How would you say that process occurs, that interaction happens?
Sorry, you're talking about growth?
Yeah, just personal. Maybe I'm not being clear, but you mentioned earlier accepting yourself, the good and the bad, and receiving more divinity. And I often think that, just realizing that the good is from divinity and allowing yourself to receive it in humility, as I think you were alluding to, and putting in perhaps a better fashion, is really powerful. And how would you describe that process of kind of looking at yourself and being real with yourself, and then receiving more embodiment from God?
Yeah. Okay. I get that. Well, I think the easy part is it feels good to do good. You do something good for others, and it gets recognized. That's the easier form of it. course, we're all human, and the times where it's maybe not the better self coming forward, it's also, it's easier to recognize when that's happening and why. So, I think that's true for most people setting out on the spiritual path. Especially, it can be easier to recognize the good, more challenging to recognize when, you're maybe on autopilot and it's just a bad day or but I think simply gaining awareness of when you're not in your better self is probably that's a form of, enlightenment recognition, if you will. It's kind of like, well, who's doing that? Where's that coming from? And what's the source of that? It's having a kind of an active curiosity about, the intention behind, whether it's the behavior, the mood. But for me personally, it's, I didn't even have that awareness really until more, as a Buddhist class in seminary kind of taught me a little bit simply about the value of just sitting and observing the mind. And when you observe the mind a bit and you kind of separate out, I'm beyond my thoughts. I mean, I can observe them, I can smile at them, but that's no longer my prime identity that I identify with, or that there is this deeper space that, doesn't even have good labels for it. You can simply make the jump between theory and feeling, and actually, actively cultivate that feeling more. Other people have different words for it. Presence is one. Being, just kind of residing in a space that kind of feels outside of temporal time, and deciding that, that is real and good and worth pursuing more, is a really big challenge for anyone, just because the world is going to tell you all kinds of other stuff, and the mind is going to tell you all kinds of other stuff. And what I really enjoyed, I've been studying more about the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, and all he did was experiment for years upon years with different things. I mean, he became an adept, a trance meditator, but he said, it felt good during the trance, but it didn't apply to the real world when you're walking through. And so I think, that's true of a lot of spiritual practices, even retreats, where you go somewhere and you feel something, and if it's not applied in real world stuff, your day-to-day relationship, who you're talking with, your engagement, every day, it becomes more like, what can be labeled hothouse flower spirituality, where you're in the perfect environment, you feel good, but then you meet with your first, wind or snowstorm, and then all of a sudden, what you had then no longer applies. And so I think part of that dynamic, it does involve self, but it also involves, relationship, possibly even to a bigger degree, simply because it really takes, you have to have someone in your life that you can talk to and to relate to, and you have to have like a primary point of relationship to anchor us all. And I'm a big advocate of that being part of what we all need to have healthy existence in the world is that, and that can be extended outward to back to the main pieces we've kind of been underscoring already. Our direct relationship with the divine, our relationship to our neighbor, our significant others, and those connections, if we deepen them, they really do allow us to help manifest more goodness in the world. And I think it's a little bit, I think I was asked that question about, who am I? Who are we? That's a big question to ask. Like, if you ask someone, who are you? Like really, who are you? And, by and large, people will give you a list of things that we can label. But at a deeper level, I think, I hopefully, this is kind of where I'm at now, which is, if I could bring joy to billions, I would love to do that. That would be great to try and get at that level of, like, doing something, manifesting, shifting. So yeah, I don't know if I completely answered it. I did dance around a few things, but yeah, generally, it feels good to do good, and when you kind of understand that all that is good is not really you, it's God, then it makes it easier.
Yeah, that's the crux of it. And I appreciate what you said about looking at yourself, taking a step back is part, that allows for growth. It's kind of like shedding light on a burgeoning plant and just becoming aware of your habits, of the good and the bad as you know it, and being willing to reflect on it, non-defensively, where, I think often we own all the things that we do, but we're very defensive towards it because we're owning it, and we're not aware of it. We're not really taking a step back and acknowledging that the good is from divinity and the destructive is from, hellish place, whatever you want to call it, misuse of the good, misuse of the light and warmth of the sun, of the divine sun. Taking that step back is often a huge step in the growth process, right?
Yeah, I'll jump in with one other metaphor, which is quite significant. In terms of brain neuroscience and the intersection of spirituality. There's everyone who's ever had a phone or a computer knows when your computer goes to sleep and the screensaver comes on. And turns out our brains do the exact same thing when we're not too engaged with life, or we're just kind of bored, or maybe it's a show that we've seen before or whatever. And there's a name for it. It's called the default mode. It's called the default mode response. And what's fascinating about that is, if we don't do anything other than what we've already been doing, and we don't seek spiritual, insight, it is possible to live entire lives, or potentially a lifetime, depending on what your spin on that is, kind of in the default mode network, where we get used to the things that we already like and think that we already know, and kind of it's almost like applying the screensaver mode to large swaths of time within our existence. So I kind of see it as kind of like I do use this sometimes, kind of like spiritual neurohacking, as a way to view ourselves as, just receivers and allowing something other than ourselves to move through us.
Yeah, and being aware that's what's happening. Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier wakefulness philosophy, being woke, and what you're saying now, it relates to something that we've been talking about in our book discussions on heaven and hell, where it talks about how a lot of spirits who are good and live lives oriented towards divinity in their own way, when they're in the spiritual realm, according to Swedenborg's visions, eventually, after they've gone through a few different states of change, they seem to wake up to themselves, and no matter how awake they were before, they feel like they finally wake up. And I think it's a reoccurring theme in a lot of traditions, including Buddhism, right, where you wake up to reality, and we're surprised, right, when that happens, when that process is starting to occur, that we've been so asleep. It's quite powerful. So lastly, I just want to touch on a few things mentioned in the chat see. The choir director at convention, that was the music minister at Wayfarers. The choir director at the last convention, is that true? Someone's asking?
Oh, okay. Right. So you met Reverend Dan Burchett. He's hopefully going to be ordained at our upcoming convention. And as a Swedenborgian. So he's actually been at doing rites and sacraments at Wayfarers for about 19 years, but he was doing that kind of on the as his, I guess you can say, the side hustle. No, it's it was as he was also doing his other ministry work in Long Beach. Open Door Ministries was part of what he was doing there. So he has been historically a music director in churches. So yeah, this past year he changed roles and came on full time as he's now the director of finance and administration at Wayfarers now.
Yeah, so he's already a reverend, right, from another tradition, is that true?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And another comment is, thanks for answering that. From Albert, he says, as Reverend Brown speaks about Buddhism, one of his ideas on Buddhism, in Buddhism terms, is called before enlightenment, carrying wood and making rice. After enlightenment, carrying wood and making rice.
Very good. I like that.
Well, Albert is also a fan of D.T. Suzuki's essays put in a book called Buddha of the North, where Suzuki, as many of our listeners probably know, was one of the leading thinkers who brought Buddhism to the West. And he wrote essays to the Japanese, his people, about Swedenborgianism, and they've been translated and put into a book. And have you heard of that author, those texts?
I have, and I've read it. We carry it at our bookstore, visitor center. So, yeah, I mean, I was impressed at kind of like the side by side comparison of kind of Zen Buddhist teaching and what Swedenborg writes. I'm like, all right, he is the Buddha of the North, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice moniker to have. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Reverend Brown, for connecting with us and sharing your deep insights and thoughts and history. I want to ask you a few more questions, but we're running out of time here. So I'm curious, is there anything else you'd like to share with the online community before we say goodbye?
No, other than that, this was a lot of fun. So I'll if I'm invited back, I'll do it again. I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, so this has been a nice surprise, refreshing, and fun.
Well, good. Yeah, it's nice catching up with you. I didn't mention it before, but you've been a mentor of mine for a number of years and a good friend. And I like these chats because we lean into the informalism, and it's nice just to hear about the guests and connect with the people listening and having their thoughts shared as well. So thank you for being willing to step into this space, and we want to have you back soon.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've taken this on, and I'm excited about your multi-ministries. It's exciting. So, and for those that don't know, I was one of those ministers that laid hands on his ordination this past summer, and that was extra special. That was the first one I've attended and been part of and active as a person to lay on hands, where one moment you're just a regular person and all of a sudden you're a reverend. So thank you, Cory.
Well, thank you. That was really touching and meant a lot to me. And it's just nice knowing that you have the support of community and people like you. And I want our listeners to know that you do ministry too. And if you ever need some support, you need to reach out and connect with us. And in a sense, have your hands laid on and and a little bit of connection and conversation, please reach out to us at swedenborgiancommunity.org, and I'm sure Reverend David Brown will be willing to connect with some of you as well. Thanks again, David, and thanks for blessing us tonight. And everyone, please go forth knowing you're quite loved. Bye.